committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Kathleen Kauth, spelled Kathleen, I represent District 31 in Southwest Omaha. 641 was brought to me by the governor's office as a culmination of a nearly decade-long process to end the state tax on Social Security. Initially, 641 was to allow Nebraska taxpayers to claim a reduction of their federal adjusted gross income equal to 70% of their Social Security benefits for taxable years beginning in 2023, which would have been a 10% increase in the reduction scheduled for this year. For technical reasons, that is not going to work. So we'll be bringing an amendment that you should have before you, which we've shared with members of the committee to restore that reduction back to 60%. A representative from the Policy Research Office will be following me to answer any technical questions about that you may have. For all the taxable years beginning with January 1st, 2024, LB 641 will allow Nebraskans to claim a reduction of their federally adjusted gross income equal to 100% of their Social Security benefits. The idea that Nebraska seniors living on a fixed income should not be double taxed by the state on money they've paid into Social Security for their entire lives comes to its conclusion in this bill. There have been multiple attempts in the last several decades to repeal this taxation. In 2021, Senator Brett Lindstrom passed LB 64 to phase out the state income tax on Social Security income over a 10-year period. In 2022, as part of the greater tax reform package, this committee and the legislature as a whole adopted LB 873 to expedite that phase out by 5 years. LB 641 would further expedite the phase out to be 100% exempt by 2024. I am honored to bring their vision of a Nebraska where senior citizens are free of this onerous and unfair tax into reality. Our seniors need this tax relief and they shouldn't be double taxed on their Social Security benefits. I would urge the committee to pass this bill onto general file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Proponents. Good morning, Mr. Will.
Good morning. Good. Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee, my name is Lee Will, Leewill, and I'm the State Budget Administrator of the Department of Administrative Services Budget Division. I'm appearing today on behalf of Governor Pillen in support of LB 641. Thank you to Senator Kauth for introducing this important legislation on behalf of the governor. This bill will fully exempt Social Security taxes in tax year 2024 to relieve our seniors of the significant tax burden. Keeping our kids here in Nebraska is critical to our communities and our kids. The governor's aims on individual Social Security and business tax cuts will deliver over $1.5 billion by the end of the 25-27 biennium to hardworking Nebraskans. These reforms have been included in the governor's budget package and still allow for $218 million in variance from the minimum reserve for the general fund. At the same time, the cash reserve fund is estimated at over $1.6 billion. And again, this reserve balance would represent 30% compared to general fund appropriations. This tax cut bill and subsequent reforms are sustainable and must be done now to ensure we keep our grandparents, parents, and kids within this great state. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I appreciate the work that the Revenue Committee does. Appreciate this bill. My name is, first name is D-E, last name is Tonak, T-O-N-A-C-K. I'm a retired math and physics educator and the current president of the NSEA Retired Association. On behalf of the Nebraska State Education Association Retired, a membership of just under 6,000, I urge you to support LB 641 completely phasing out our state taxation on Social Security benefits 1 year earlier, and cross off the next line because I just heard the 70% needs to stay 60%. A guiding principle is that retirement incomes are intended to keep our elderly and disabled citizens out of poverty. They are not intended to be sources of revenue for the state. And in alignment with Governor Pillen's emphasis of keeping young people in Nebraska, we also need to keep older people in Nebraska. They are tremendous contributors to the economy of our state. State taxation of these benefits varies among different states and has evolved over the years. What are other states doing? Most states exempt Social Security from state taxes. Nebraska is often listed as one of the, quote, retiree unfriendly states, unquote, by virtue of taxation. And often Nebraska is at the top of those lists, unfortunately. A Kiplinger report states, quote, the 36.5 million people who are at risk at double taxation live in the 12 states that currently tax Social Security benefits, although that's often at various different levels. This list includes Colorado, Connecticut, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Utah, and Vermont. However, there are different levels of income upon which the taxation begins. Several of these 12 states exclude a portion of other retirement income, such as those from state, federal, or military sources from state taxation. And our legislature has already addressed some of those issues. And then I list some states there. They include Colorado, Connecticut, Montana, Missouri. A few of these states allow some sort of state deduction from federal taxes of Social Security benefits before calculating the state taxes. Nebraska and Utah tax Social Security benefits in the same way as the federal government does. Nebraska has already understood this issue. You've already set it to cut off at the year 2025. Another point, my last point, is that when you look at the word Social Security, that security is being threatened by healthcare costs for most retirees. The healthcare cost increase will claim a significant slice of any Social Security cost of living. So let's end state taxation on these benefits. It's a conservative approach. Removing them will assist retiree security and make Nebraska just a bit more retiree friendly. And as a math teacher, it seems to me the math would just be simpler. Let's just get it done. Somebody else's punchline, let's get her done. So that would conclude it. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you. Seeing none, thank you much. Next proponent. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator Lenahan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is David Holmquist, DAVID HOLMQUIST, and I'm testifying today on behalf of AARP Nebraska in support of LB 641. AARP is the largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization representing the interests of Americans age 50 and older and their families. Key priorities of our organization include helping all Nebraskans achieve financial and health security. In particular, AARP strongly believes that all individuals have the right to be self-reliant and to live with dignity in retirement. AARP is working to strengthen retirement security for all Americans by ensuring that workers and retirees have access to their hard-earned and hard-saved dollars. To help elevate these priority issues in 2022, AARP Nebraska worked closely with all of the members of the legislature, as well as the then Governor Pete Ricketts, to enact LB 825, or LB 873 in its final form, which reduced all state taxation on Social Security benefits by 2025. This new law strengthens the retirement security of all Nebraskans by ensuring that workers and retirees have access to the benefits they have earned. To continue our important work on behalf of older Nebraskans, today we share our support for LB 641 and encourage all of you on this committee to support the measure. LB 641 would phase out all state taxes on Social Security benefits, as you know. As you've heard us testify before, many retirees tell us they're using Social Security to help care for their own parents, their spouses, and more often are taking on the financial challenge of raising or helping to raise their grandchildren. They also feel they have limited options for rejoining the workforce and virtually no time horizon to increase savings. These taxes on Social Security benefits could go to several essential uses, like paying for the ever-growing cost of prescription medications, as well as food, clothing, utility bills, and other costs. In fact, in 2017, 29% of Nebraska residents stopped taking medications as prescribed due to cost. Moreover, older Nebraskans on fixed income clearly feel the effects of inflation and more than the rest of us, making it even more crucial that they are able to keep more of their hard-earned Social Security benefit. I apologize, this print is too small. This will afford middle-income Nebraskans the increased financial security throughout their retirement years, hopefully allowing them to care for their families and to age in place in their homes and communities at the lowest level of care. Older Nebraskans are an asset, not a liability. Within our state, Nebraskans age 50 and over create an economic impact much greater than the portion of the population. As the percentage of state residents over 50 continues to grow, so will their contributions to our economy. According to the Longevity Economy, a report prepared by AARP and The Economist, Nebraskans 50 and older generated 39% of the state's gross domestic product in 2018, totaling $50 billion. Moreover, the report found that state residents 50 and older make up just 34% of our population. And in 2018, they supported 566,000 jobs across the state and generated $33 billion in wages and salary. Our older populations also contributed $2.2 billion in unpaid caregiving in 2018 for spouses, parents, aunts, uncles, and Nebraska's children. We look forward to working with all of you to enact and implement policies like LB 641 that preserves and supports this economic engine in our state and helps ensure that older, middle-income Nebraskans can live their retirement years with dignity and independence. In closing, it's important to note that we do recognize the fiscal impact of the legislation and appreciate LB 641 in its independent form. We appreciate your consideration of this individual proposal and encourage the committee to continue to work to ensure increased financial security options that be in place for older Nebraskans and their families. Thank you to Senator Kauth for introducing LB 641 and to the governor for requesting that. We appreciate the opportunity to comment and request your support in advancing the bill as amended. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Holmquist, are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you.
Next proponent.
Good morning, members of the Revenue Committee. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John Hansen. I am the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. This gets us to where we're going a little bit faster. We're in a financial position to afford it. As you look at folks that are retirement age and are getting Social Security benefits, folks in rural communities and across the state are looking at inflation. They're looking at medication costs. They're looking at property tax increases, valuation increases. And so anything that we can do to help them on the fixed income side of the line to be able to meet their obligations and live comfortably is a good thing. And so because it doesn't change tax policy, it just simply gets us to where we're already agreed that we ought to go. And we appreciate the fact that every once in a while, and it doesn't happen all that often, There's actually a good rationale for doing certain kinds of things with tax policy based on the ability to pay and other things. So we've always thought that this was a very reasonable thing to do, that it made logical sense, and that we've always sort of struggled with the idea of why it is that you should be taxing Social Security benefits in the first place. So with that, well, I think everything else that needs to be said has been said, and would like to thank Senator Kauth for bringing the bill and the governor for his support of it. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other proponents? Are there opponents? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Joey Adler-Ruane, Joeyadler, space Ruane, and I am the Policy Director at Open Sky Policy Institute, here to testify in opposition to LB 641 for two main reasons. The revenue reduction that comes with the full exemption could jeopardize the services that Nebraska seniors rely on, particularly given the state's changing demographics. And second, the exemption will mostly benefit high-income Nebraska seniors. The cost of a full exemption of Social Security benefits would cost an estimated $168 million annually and is likely to grow from there. The number of Nebraskans aged 65 and older is projected to grow by 90% from 2010 to 2050, while Nebraskans aged 18 to 64 are projected to grow by just 12%. Consequently, the revenue loss from exempting Social Security will increase as the number of seniors grows relative to the number of Nebraskans in the workforce supporting them. So to provide the exemption now, we must shift the future tax onto working Nebraskans to avoid cuts to services provided by the state, including those important to seniors like healthcare. We are also concerned about the distribution of LB 641, which shows increasing the exemption from 70% to 100% in 2024 will send about 58% of the tax benefits to the top 20% of Nebraska seniors, or those with annual incomes above $138,000. At the bottom of the distribution, 40% of Nebraska seniors, those with annual incomes below $55,000, will see no savings. That's largely because in 2014, Nebraska exempted seniors at the lower and middle income groups from the state income tax and Social Security benefits. In 2022, seniors married filing jointly are 100% exempt from the state income tax on their Social Security benefits if their incomes are under $61,000. All others filers are fully exempt in 2022 if their incomes are under $45,000. Given our concerns with the increasing cost of the exemption over time as older Nebraskans grow in population relative to working age residents, and that is mostly a tax cut for wealthy seniors, we oppose 641. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there other opponents? Is there anyone wanting to testify in the neutral position? Senator Kauth, would you like to close? And we'll look if we have letters. We do have letters. We have 10 proponents, 2 opponents, and no one was neutral.
In closing, I'd like to say it's very important for our senior population to get this type of tax cut, even if it does benefit some people who do make a little bit more money than others. It's important that everyone receive this. They've already paid taxes on that money. They've worked for that money. They need that money to survive. And as I door knocked this summer, I ran into many people who are older and saying, I'm on a fixed income. Inflation is going through the roof. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I may have to leave this state because of our taxes. So this is just one step that we need to do to take care of those people. So thank you very much. I'd like to ask that you move this onto the floor.
Thank you. Are there questions for Senator Kauth? There's one thing, Senator Kauth, before we exec on this, I think it would be helpful for the committee, and the committee staff can help you. So if you're over 65, retired, and what the income limits, you don't pay taxes on your Social Security, and you're also eligible for the homestead exemption, I think, in a great number of cases. But if you go over that limit, then you aren't eligible for a homestead exemption, and you're not exempt from paying taxes on Social Security. So I think a little side by side for the committee about how we treat one group versus the other group would be helpful.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much for being here. With that, we'll close the hearing on LB 641 and open the hearing on LB 820. Morning, Senator Albrecht.
Good morning. Chair's a little low again.
I don't know who fixes that magically, but whoever you are, please fix it.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Linehan and my fellow members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Joni Albrecht, Joni Albrecht, Albrecht, and I represent District 17, which includes Dakota, Thurston, Wayne, and a portion of Dixon County in northeast Nebraska. LB 820 enacts the Agricultural Valuation Fairness Act to provide for a more fair and uniform assessment of agricultural and horticultural land in Nebraska. I would like to take a moment to thank Governor Pillen for listening to the farm and ranch families across Nebraska. This is a structural reform of property tax relief that needs to happen throughout the state of Nebraska. Our family has had these same concerns, and this is a major step in the right direction. Thank you, Governor Pillen. Allow me to explain the Agricultural Valuation Fairness Act. It is a structural reform of property valuation for agricultural and horticultural land for tax purposes in Nebraska and changes the tax valuation from market-based valuation to an income potential valuation. The proposed fair income-based property valuation structure will rely on productivity and income potential of the land. The income-based taxation is sound policy and leads to a more fair and equitable assessment. This creates stability and predictability for agricultural assessments. LB 820 establishes that the Agricultural Land Valuation Committee will be established for the ag land values by land capability groups for agricultural land throughout the state and appropriate capitalization of rate limits. Land values are established utilizing a production approach to value. The total value of ag and horticultural land cannot increase more than 3.5% statewide. The Agricultural Land Valuation Committee will determine assessed values using the income-based approach. These valuations will be implemented by county assessors. County assessors currently inventory agricultural land on productivity index, making the implementation of this bill simple at the county level. The assessed values determined by the committee will be developed using income and expense information from the United States Department of Agriculture, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Institute on Ag and Natural Resource, landowner surveys made available to the committee, or other sources that yield reliable information. Nebraska is an outlier in how it values ag land. States such as Iowa, Kansas, and South Dakota utilize an income-based assessment to value their ag land. Agricultural land values are once again expected to face double-digit increases across the state. Implementation of this bill for 2024 will limit those increases to 3.5%, potentially reducing agricultural land valuations by $7.5 billion. I think it's good to note that the valuation of agricultural land in Nebraska is $89.4 billion annually. LB 820 would be operative for 2024, providing sufficient time for county assessors and the Department of Revenue to implement and enact the changes. Following me will be Ruth Sorensen, the Property Tax Administrator, and Sarah Scott, Field Operations Manager for the Department of Revenue. Both will explain the need for the Agriculture Valuation Fairness Act and how it would be implemented and why this is the right time for Nebraska to implement this bill to address once and for all the growing hardships caused by property values in the agricultural sector. I thank you for listening and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Albrecht. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Dungan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Senator Albrecht, for being here. Obviously, it's been a long week, I think, for all of us. I'm obviously a little bit newer to this discussion, being a more urban senator. I know a lot of the more rural issues haven't affected me personally as much, but I've been speaking with a lot of people about that. Genuinely curious, when we're shifting from a market-based approach rather to an income-based approach for valuing the land, the word fair has been used a lot. What about that is what makes that a more fair assessment? Because it seems to me the market-based approach is at least relatively fair if we're looking at comparisons to other sales that have been done, guidelines in the market. And so what about that income-based assessment makes it more fair?
I think that's a great question. I had that same question about 13 years ago when I married my husband. I said, why? Why would we not pay based on what we produce? You know, again, that's me coming from the urban area. And I said, you know, here we are. Our land value is based on what other people buy land for around us. So if my husband bought land back in the day for $400 an acre, you know, today you can buy it up to $12,000 or more per acre. Why would you not? I mean, we need that land to do business, right? And we don't plan on selling our land. So here we are. Every time these valuations go up, I mean, it can just take you out of business if you don't have enough resources to cover the taxes that you're going to be assessed, because the valuations have skyrocketed. When I first came down, actually when I first went up there, I was working with Farm Bureau. I sat on their board, and I think it's important to share this story because back 12 years ago, where I live was the highest valuation in the state. It was like 238% increase over that 10-year period. And there's no way that anybody could sustain that kind of increase, you know. And then they say that from like 2006 to 2016, I think it went up another 169%, I believe, throughout the state. And then just in this last year, I mean, we could be facing another 12% increase. So we have to be able to control those valuations so that we can figure out how to keep these operators in business, because ag is one of the top industries in our state, and we want to be able to protect that.
Thank you. And then the last question I had too, again, just trying to make sure I understand this, similar to my question that we had yesterday on a separate bill, there's this 3.5% cap on the increase. How was that 3.5% reached? Is that an average? Is that a market? I mean, where are we getting that number from, I guess is my question.
That would probably be a good question for those who follow me, and how they came up with 3.5. I'm happy. I'm sure that many operators would be happy with that throughout the state. But we all have to be able to live within our means, whether it's a county, city, state. We just have to work together to make it work for the rest of the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Kauth.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. So Senator Albrecht, so are there farmers who actually either go out of business or have to sell part of their land because their taxes are so high that what they make off their crops and off of their operations doesn't cover it?
You know, we have had people leave the state. I mean, that gentleman that they talked about, I believe, yesterday, I mean, it was like a several generation farm family that would leave our state and go to Missouri and have so much more ability to make money, because the margins are so thin when it comes to agriculture. I mean, if we have a good bumper crop, hey, that's all great, but the cost of fuel, the cost of chemicals and fertilizer, and just to operate, to upgrade your equipment, to do whatever you need to do, it's tough. So these property taxes fall into it just as much. And while we're happy to support our schools and do whatever we need to do for our communities, it's just another part of making it work. And people usually don't leave because we're a 7th generation farm family. We're not just selling out because the taxes are too high. We've dealt with it all these years, but cutting a break would be pretty nice. So.
Thank you, Senator Kauth. Are there any other questions for Senator Albrecht? Senator Merman.
Yes, thanks for the bill. Do you think it's even fair to tax farmland for on property taxes? Because, everyone that lives in a school district either owns a home or rents a home.
Mhm.
So it seems like to me a fairer way to tax would be to tax on residences only, because that's where the children come from. That, most of our property taxes go to supporting education. And of course, a farmer needs the land to support his business and, or to even be in business. And of course, there's other business owners in the district typically, but they don't have as big a requirement to own as many assets as a farmer typically does. So what do you think of the fairness of even taxing farmland?
Well, obviously, with all these tax bills that we're going to talk about, I mean, they have to tax us so that we can pay for our schools, pay for all of the different things that we have, whether it's farm, like the fire departments or ESUs or natural resource district, community colleges. I mean, we want to be in it. It wouldn't be enough if it was just our homes. And we're not probably looking at it for that particular reason, and it's going to be there. But I can only hope that the direction that we're going in this year with cutting the taxes the way we are to help support the schools a little bit more so that we as farm and ranch families don't have to carry that burden. But if I thought we had enough votes to do that, believe me, I'd bring it, but I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I didn't want to say that farmers don't want
No, we're
to support
happy
the
to
schools, because they definitely do, and support all the necessities, like you said. But
Roads.
but I just wanted to emphasize the unfairness of overtaxing farmland.
I can understand that. Yeah, it's definitely overtaxed.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Are there other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hope everybody's doing good. It's Friday.
Yes, yay.
Doggone it, we can't work tomorrow.
You can.
Good one, I like that. Well, good morning, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jim Pillen, J-I-M, P as in Paul, I-L-L-E-N. I have the honor to serve as the governor of the state of Nebraska. That wasn't normal for me to say yesterday. It's not today, and it won't be tomorrow, but it's an extraordinary privilege. Incredible. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 820. I'd like to thank Senator Albrecht for bringing this bill. I've lived my whole life in this game and understand land valuations, understand income potentials, and could tell you endless numbers of stories that how critical this bill is from my seat. The ag land valuation process in Nebraska since renewable fuels policy became law January 2 of 07 has just gotten out of whack. We currently operate in a market value system. That means we're taxed on what our neighbor's property is sold for, regardless of the underlying use, doesn't matter. Or the income earning potential of the land. When your neighbor sells the land, the value of the land is impacted. It's led to extraordinary rises depending upon whether you're in an urban area and the community's outreach, or whether there's people that have bought land for extraordinary hunting privileges. It has nothing to do with income earning potential of ag. This is incredibly harmful to our ag producers, the #1 industry in the state since the founding, because the burden of the property taxes just continue to rise. We have people across the state literally being taxed out of their businesses, literally being taxed out. This just is not fair. We have ranch families that are count their property tax by mom and cow, and say, gee, I'm going to have to go across the state border to keep our family in business. We have to do better for our ag producers and taxpayers to address the problem, and that's where LB 820 comes in. This bill would change how we calculate ag land valuations from market-based to assuming ag land based on income potential. And I think I would add, I don't know of a farmer or rancher that doesn't believe in their kids, and I don't know of one that is not, that does not support paying their fair share. But when it's taxed so much that you can't even get, I know of ranches with lots of acres where they rent their ranch out and they can't get enough rent to pay the property tax, much less get a return for the investment. So if our ag land would be assessed on the reflection of its land value potential, this change brings common sense back to a land assessment process and is a key component in helping provide the tax relief for the ag industry. I believe we should not be putting producers in a position where the value of their land is so high that they can't afford to do business. Because the income from farming is simply not enough to cover it. An artificially inflated set of assets. So agriculture, we all know, is our number one asset, number one driver of our economy, and it's imperative that that stays that way. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit this morning. As I've said in previous testimony, I'm open to visit with anybody in this room, anytime, any place, anywhere. I think it's really important that we get these priorities across the finish line for the state of Nebraska. So thanks again for allowing me to testify. I know that everybody's worked incredibly hard and long this week, and all Nebraskans appreciate it. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Governor. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you.
If I could, I wouldn't mind just addressing your question previously, Senator Dugan. I think that the other aspect to try to understand would be, in Gretna, for example, great growth. And what happens then is that there's farmland or people that are going to be farming for the next 20 years yet, but they're within 3 miles of where the growth's happening. And all of a sudden their land was sold for development at $30,000 an acre. And then land 3 miles down the road got assessed by the county assessor. So this person with 123 acres, has to borrow money to pay the tax, can't make the income off that farm, has to borrow money. So what's their options? Well, they've just got to sell it because it makes no sense. They can't economically keep it. The other thing is, remember, the state of Nebraska has 73,000 miles of rivers and creeks and hunting. Hunting's a big deal. And so there's lots of people that come in because of the appreciation for that, buy the land at really escalated prices, and then that leaks all into ag income. And so, those are the things that have crept in and then impacts that. And that money goes to local government and it just evaporates into thin air. And then if you think about the number of people and you think about what the taxation increase has gone, the number of people in a lot of our communities have shrunk, but yet the amount of taxation that goes to local government has escalated and less people. It makes no sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see. Thank you very much, Governor. Next proponent. Good morning.
I feel like I'm sitting low.
I know. Yeah, there must be some ghost that comes in at night and messes with our shit.
Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Ruth Sorensen, RUTH SORENSEN. I am the Property Tax Administrator for the state of Nebraska, and I'm speaking in support of LB 820. This is the Governor's Property Valuation Bill, known as the Agricultural Valuation Fairness Act. This act creates a valuation structure for agricultural land based on the capability of the land the land has to produce an agricultural product. This is the agricultural use value. You are being provided with a regional map and a chart of estimated 2022 assessed values trended into 2023 assessed values. We will not have the actual 2023 assessed values until later in March. However, using the estimated values, this chart reflects what the changes in value for agricultural land would have been in the counties under the current market approach compared to the expected changes in value if the income production method had been in effect for 2023. This chart shows that using the income approach slows the growth of agricultural land valuation increases. You will also notice that some counties will experience larger increases under the production approach. My teammate Sarah Scott will follow me in testifying and can discuss the technical aspects of the bill. LB 820 is a step in shifting the tax burden back to a distribution closer to what existed when the legislature decided that 75% preferential assessment was appropriate. From 2006 to 2016, the statewide value of agricultural land increased 264%, while residential property increased 33%, and commercial and industrial property increased 43%. Since 2016, agricultural land has been flat to slightly declining, while residential and commercial property increased by single digits each year. Despite the changing market conditions since 2016, there remains a disproportionate shift to agricultural land taxation that has not been corrected by the marketplace. Current sales suggest that agricultural land valuations will be on the rise by double digits percentages since once again beginning in the assessment year 2024, approximately 12%, making this the right time to move to a use approach value. LB 820 establishes the Agricultural Land Valuation Committee that will establish the agricultural use values. However, LB 820 also keeps the county assessor as an integral part of the process. The county assessor retains local control over classifying agricultural land, and county assessors will have representation on the Agricultural Land Valuation Committee. The agricultural land value by land capability groups, we call that LCG, and land use will be certified to county assessors after the committee meets in November. County assessors may petition the tax commissioner by February 1st for alternative values if information is available to show the adjustments are necessary to produce uniform and proportionate values. Also, the property tax administrator may petition the tax commissioner by April 7th if the values established by the county assessor do not comply with the requirements of this act. After implementing the values established by the Agricultural Land Valuation Committee, the county assessors will apply the values and file the county abstract with the Department of Revenue in March. The department will calculate the aggregate agricultural use valuation for the state, and if this value exceeds 3.5% over the prior year assessed values, the values will be reduced by an order from the tax commissioner, increasing the capitalization rates uniformly. This is called the uniform factor. This will achieve an aggregate change of 3.5%. It is important to note that as a single uniform factor will be used to adjust values. Individual properties and even individual counties have the potential to increase by more than 3.5%. However, this process will ensure that valuations statewide will remain uniform and proportionate within the class of agricultural and horticultural land. LB 820 would be operative for 2024, giving plenty of time for county assessors, political subdivisions, and the state to prepare for this change. Agricultural producers are facing significant valuation increases in the near future. This is something that we can do, and it is something that we should do. At this point, that concludes my testimony, and I'm open to any questions. Oh, the red light came on.
Thank you. Nicely done. Administrator Surtson, thank you. Other questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. And thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. I tried to follow it as much as I could.
I understand.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you distributed correctly. So there would be, under the Valuation Fairness Act, there would be some counties that would see significant increases in their valuations. I mean, upwards of 30%. Is that an accurate view of what's on this document?
Yes, that is correct.
Is there, if we were to make this switch, is there a chance that the overall valuations in the state for agricultural land is lower than before we made the switch?
Is there, I'm sorry, can you
Can,
repeat?
can the
question?
total valuations of agricultural land after we switch to this new system be lower than it was before we switched?
Yes, that it was testified to that it'd be 7.5 billion.
And so is that made up by the commercial and residential property owners?
Well,
What are those shortfalls? How do we backfill the government services we're already funding?
well, that would come down to with the valuations being changed. It could transfer to commercial and residential. However, they've had lower increases over the years than agricultural land has. And also some of the commercial properties get incentives. So they'll have incentives as well as perhaps maybe a higher valuation. But even though you have a higher valuation, you should not have higher taxes. Because the local control, they can lower the tax levies.
Sure, but if we have to, let's imagine we have to fill the same pot of money, but we've now have lower valuations on the ag side and higher valuations on the residential side. And we want to keep a flat amount of money. That will be a tax increase on residential property owners. There's no way it can't be.
Well, the valuation, this is valuation, this is not tax. And
Sure,
so-
but
and
as
so-
valuation becomes taxation,
Correct.
this will represent a tax increase.
I would point out that agricultural land has increased over 200%. in the past 10 years.
I don't disagree with
And
that.
so the counties were encountering windfalls. They had a lot of value upon which they were levying, and they did not lower their levies.
Ma'am,
and so-
I 100% believe we should be lowering
Okay,
the property taxes of agricultural land. My only addition to that is we also must be lowering the property taxes of residential. The people in my district, their property taxes are too high as well. And so I think if there's an element of this that brings me concern, it would be that if this can have a adverse impact on residential property owners. I'm not trying to challenge in any way
right, no, I understand.
the completely valid desire to have a reduction in property taxes for agricultural land.
Mhm.
That's necessary. I just want to make sure that we're not hurting other people in the process.
I understand. And we would have to look at, if we were to look at residential, we have to also look at commercial because they're the same class.
Right.
Agricultural is a separate class. And so we would have to look at what is happening in those sectors upon the implementation of the Agricultural Fairness Act.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the information and I look forward to continuing to dig through this.
Okay. And you can contact us if you have questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Are there other questions from the committee? I think I'm going to follow up where Senator Boster
Sure.
is and maybe ask the questions in a different way because there is I think, a lack of understanding the difference between rural Nebraska and urban Nebraska when we come to property taxes. So in rural Nebraska over the last, 12 years, valuations have been going up on ag land, but in many of the communities that those ag lands surround, those house valuations stayed flat. So as people tried, if they did, not take a windfall and try to drop the levy, we actually have homeowners across Nebraska in rural communities whose property taxes on their home have not increased significantly or at all for the last several years. Would that be an accurate statement?
That would be very accurate.
Okay, that's, I think, but then, as Senator Boster says, when you get to Lincoln or Elkhorn or Omaha, they have a whole different situation.
Correct.
Okay, so one of the things I just want to point out here, I think it's Richardson County, number 74. And I appreciate you have this in alphabetical order, not county order. So there was several news stories, land sold for $27,000 an acre in Richardson County. So I'm looking at this thinking that maybe Richardson County is probably a little bit underestimated right now. But if we don't do this, because of sales of land, it could go up to almost 30%.
That is correct. Overall in the state, it would be a 12% increase. Some counties are going to get much more significant increases, the double digits. And this again is an estimate because we do not have the 2023 values, as you pointed out.
Right. So I think one of the concerns will be, and this is just, and I am supportive of this, but one of the concerns will be that if you've got some counties who've done a better job of how do I want to say this?
Valuing.
Evaluating, the outliers are going to get caught here a little bit, but
Correct.
that's part of the purpose, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
You can see there's some bullet points at the end where we have, there's a double asterisk next to, for instance, county number 9.
Mhm.
That is because the assessment practices in that county are questionable.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, say that again.
The assessment practices in that county are questionable and we need to review the agricultural land. That's why you'll see an increase there.
But those people that live there like that assessor. Okay, other questions? Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. Thank you for your testimony
Sure.
here today. Did you say what capitalization rate you used to arrive at these numbers?
This is not the capital, in the chart itself.
Yes, to arrive at this data, you had to arrive at a capitalization rate, correct?
This is still the market approach.
Pardon?
This is the market approach, so we don't use a capitalization rate on our estimates.
But isn't there an income approach in your chart here relative to the bill? Yeah. Because you.
Oh, the estimate, yes,
Yes,
correct.
Yes.
I would have Ms. Scott testify to that. She's following me, and she's the one that helped assist with this chart. I
Perfect. Thank you.
apologize, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Are there any other questions? Senator Merman.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how valuations are determined now with the market value, but I think the top sales are not used and the bottom sales are not used like in ag land too. Is that true?
That is not correct. What we have to do is we have to array all the sales, and then we take the the medium. If it's an odd number, we take the middle 2. If it's an even number, we'll take that middle number. And then the assessors will assess from there. If it's an extreme, there are cases where it's sold from dad to son. Those are excluded. So there are certain lower sales that are excluded, but the larger sales generally will stay in unless there's some type of factor that's in statute that has the assessor eliminate those from their valuation.
Oh, so some of the
So we don't
bottom
trim.
sales are not used, but the
Some,
top
and some of the larger.
sales
Yeah, we are not trimming at this time.
Okay, the top sales are not thrown out unless there's,
Unless there's some type of influential factor that's listed in the statute, the assessors should be using them.
okay, and then I have another question. In the last couple of years, the way I understand it, in most of rural Nebraska, housing values have gone up similarly to Lincoln and Omaha. I'm not sure if they're exactly the same or, the same, but I'm hearing in parts of my district that house values are really going up in the last year or two.
In the last year or two, they've been flat to slightly increasing. So certain areas it's been flat, not keeping up with ag. But prior to that, they were they were flat.
Yeah, I agree.
They were not
Prior to that,
increasing.
they were.
Yes.
I'm talking about just in the last year or
Correct.
two.
Yeah, I mean, even here you see people paying more than the asking prices. But the market is changing now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Duggan.
Thank you, Chair Minahan, and thank you again for this very technical testimony.
Yes,
I appreciate that. You heard my question earlier, I'm guessing, and I'm still kind of stuck on this 3.5% increase.
Mhm.
Do you know where that number came from or why that's being established as the cap with regard to the statewide increase in valuation on ag land?
Yes, the percentage change that we arrived at is the abstract current valuation. Abstracts are filed by the county assessors minus the abstract prior value, last year's, and then we divide it by the prior value. And so then the 5.3% cap factor is the percentage change that we arrive at minus the 3.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Duggan. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan, members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Sarah Scott, SARAHSCOTT. I am the Field Operations Manager for the Property Assessment Division, speaking in support of LB 820. I will address some of the technical aspects of the bill. Under LB 820, the Agricultural Land Valuation Committee will determine agricultural land values for all counties utilizing an income approach to valuation. The basic formula is gross income less expense divided by capitalization rate equals value. For cropland, including grassland used for hay, gross income will be determined using an 8-year average yield for each county based on the primary crops that are grown in the county, excluding the highest and lowest values of the period. This will normalize the effect of different weather patterns and will average out the good years with the not so good years. Most states use somewhere between an 8 to 10-year average. Gross income will be determined by taking the average yield for each county times current commodity prices. Yield information is publicly available from the United States Department of Agriculture's National Agricultural Statistics Service, referred to as USDA NASS. And it can be weighted based on the typical crops grown in each county. This is the typical approach used by most states and avoids burdening taxpayers with filing actual yield data. The income is indexed across 8 land capability groups called LCGs, ensuring the income is directly tied to the capability of the land to produce a crop. Expense ratios will be developed from using information from the USDA NASS, University of Nebraska, and surveys from farmers, ranchers, or agribusiness regarding actual expense and landlord share. The gross income minus expense, as described above, results in the net income. For grassland used for grazing, the analysis will be based on the estimated forage yield by considering the carrying capacity of the land in animal unit months, referred to as AUMs, using an average of the past 8 years, excluding the highest and lowest values of the period. The most recent rental rate per AUM will be multiplied by the carrying capacity to determine gross income. The committee may deduct landowner expenses from this calculation. The capitalization rate will be developed using sales from the region that represent agricultural uses only. In oversimplified terms, dividing the income estimate per acre by the selling price per acre will indicate the capitalization rate. LB 820 allows the flexibility for the capitalization rate to be established based on classes or subclasses of agricultural land within a county. The capitalization rate will be calibrated to result in an assessment level within 69 to 75% of market value, preserving the market as a measuring stick to ensure that valuations are uniform and proportionate. It is important to understand that within the implementation year, some counties will receive increases or decreases that appear untypical. A flaw of the current market approach to valuation is that when insufficient sales exist
or when sales are overly influenced by non-agricultural uses within a class or subclass of property, it is more difficult to accurately determine assessed valuations. Under the income approach, income and expense data is available for all counties. The market component is the capitalization rate, which can more accurately be developed from a larger region of sales. County assessors currently use soil types published by the NRCS to inventory each soil into 8 land capability groups. In 2019, as a result of LB 372, the Property Assessment Division changed the structure of the land capability groups, ensuring that each subclass of agricultural land was inventoried based on productivity information relevant to its specific use. County assessors converted to the new LCG structure in the 2020 assessment year. With this conversion in place, county assessors will be able to implement valuations established under LB 820 easily without computer programming costs. This is the right time to implement the Agricultural Land Valuation Fairness Act. And I would answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Breeze.
Thank you, Chairwoman Linehan. And thanks for your testimony here today. So you utilize different capitalization rates for different counties, different subclasses.
Yes.
Okay. And so in arriving at those capitalization rates, what percent of actual value did you use?
For this model, I attempted to target 72%, which is the current middle of the point. Now, I will say that any statistical model has a percentage of error, so there is some variability in that, but close to 72%.
The bottom line is your calculations are tied to actual value, correct?
That is correct.
You target 72%. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Breeze. Are there other questions? Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you, ma'am. So the 8 years of historical average, that's in line with other states, I think you mentioned.
That is correct.
And then you talked about how the expenses or costs can be taken off of that. How are those determined?
So the USDA NASS database also has a database of actual expense, or not actual, survey expenses that they survey farmers and ranchers in all 50 states. And so that information is publicly available. The other option is to determine, instead of an expense, so you would use that information to determine an expense ratio, basically. And you would apply that expense ratio to the gross income to get net income. The other option, which is allowed, either option is allowed in the bill, that is very common in other states, is to use a landlord share. So it's typical that in a landlord tenant arrangement that the landlord would get a 35% share. So that can be used in lieu of expense ratios, or whatever factor that the committee would decide was appropriate.
So the survey data that's available, is that essentially available on a statewide basis, or is it more narrowly determined than that?
It is published by county.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Boster. Are there other questions from the committee? Senator Merman.
I've got to apologize. I don't know as much about the USDA NASS data as I should, but does that, or how much does it consider irrigation costs? Because where I'm from, irrigation costs is a large part of the costs.
It has that's a very good question, and because that varies across the state. It is very extensive. I believe it to be, very in-depth, and you can get detail from the database as to what those expenses include. But again, it's important to remember that this bill does not tie the committee's hand to that source. They are allowed to investigate other sources. There's a representative from UNL on the committee, and they do extensive research in this area. So the committee's hands are not tied to that database.
Thank you. And then I've got kind of a related question. Since we are mostly irrigated in the local area, we can usually count on a good crop. And you mentioned county average production would be used. We can count on a good crop unless we get wind or hail. And that seems to be more common in recent years. is that taken into consideration in those county averages? I apologize, I should know that too, but
No problem. So yes, it is, because it is based on the actual yield from, so you do an 8-year look back to say what was the actual yield in 8 years, and you remove the highest and lowest. So over the past several years, we've had a lot of wind damage and drought and things. So yes, it would be reflective in the actual yield data that they publish.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Are there any other questions from the committee? See none, thank you. That was very helpful. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee. I am Mark McCarg, President of Nebraska Farm Bureau. I am here to testify on behalf of Nebraska Farm Bureau, but also Nebraska Corn Growers Association, Nebraska Soybean Association, Nebraska State Dairy Association, Nebraska Pork Association, Nebraska Wheat Growers, and the Renewable Fuels Nebraska. I'm here in support of the intent of Senator Albrecht's LB 820, the Agricultural Valuation
Mr.
Fairness
McCarg,
Act.
can you
Yes,
spell your name as
Sorry,
well as
yes.
we know you?
Mark McCarg, MERKMCHARGUE. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
As I was saying, I'm here in support of the intent of Senator Albright's LB 820, the Agriculture Valuation Fairness Act, yet concerned with the potential results of the methodology proposed. LB 820 is intended to provide a more fair and uniform assessment of agriculture and horticulture land in Nebraska. This is to achieve fairness. This has been talked about. All agriculture and horticultural land will be assessed based on its capacity to produce income, called agricultural use value. Procedurally, LB 820 establishes an agricultural land valuation committee, as been mentioned, to establish agricultural land values by land capability groups for ag land throughout the state. Land values will be established by using a production approach to value. Gross income will be computed using an 8-year average yield data with the highest and lowest values removed. Gross income is reduced to the net income by utilizing expense ratios. The net income is then capitalized to determine the assessed value. The capitalization rate is determined by the ALV and is calculated to arrive at valuations within 69 to 75%, which was mentioned previously of market value, ensuring the assessed value are uniformly and proportionally assessed with the class of ag. This next point I think is very important. Values of all agriculture and horticultural land statewide cannot be above the current market-based standard of 75% of value and cannot increase more than 3.5% over the prior year. The major positive of this approach is that it utilizes productivity of the land. One significant downside of the degree of the estimation involved. Forecasting future income, expense streams in agriculture involves a high degree of professional judgment. Our preliminary analysis has brought us to one conclusion. There are too many variables in this proposal to make an accurate assessment. This will have an impact on every agricultural landowner across the state, and at this time, we're unable to calculate what that impact might be. Please know that this does not mean we're throwing a cold water on this effort. We appreciate Governors Pillins and Senator Albright's bringing this issue to the forefront. We hope that the discussion today in the coming weeks will give us a better idea about questions we need to answer and the steps we need to take this idea to make it a reality. We appreciate your consideration and perspective and hope to work with you to achieve a more fair and uniform assessment of agriculture and horticultural land. The Nebraska Farm Bureau does have long-standing policy on moving to a production-based valuation versus market-based. And so this does fall in line with what our members have asked for, but certainly have some concerns on the methodology, as mentioned, on how we put this all together. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCarg. Do we have any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next proponent. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Scott Peterson, SCOTTPETERSON. I am Chair-elect of the Nebraska Cattlemen Taxation Committee. I'm also a cow-calf producer and an attorney from Valentine, Nebraska. So hello from the Great White North. I have also offices in Atkinson, Nebraska, Winter, South Dakota, and Martin, South Dakota. And I appear before you today to testify on behalf of Nebraska Cattlemen in support of LB 820. LB 820 is a step forward to shift valuations of ag land from a market value-based to an income potential approach. Under the current market value-based system used in Nebraska, valuations do not accurately reflect the income producing potential of the land, which many people have already pointed out. And this puts Nebraska producers at a competitive disadvantage with producers from other states. We hear often about the competitive disadvantage for veterans, and so we've lowered the taxes for them. We've heard earlier today about the competitive disadvantage in our state for seniors. This is the most obvious competitive disadvantage that I think we face. My personal experience is that the property taxes on land I use for livestock in Nebraska. So I have land on both sides of the Nebraska and South Dakota border. It costs approximately twice the cost of property taxes on substantially similar land that I own in South Dakota. I realize that this may not completely be due to the valuation model, but I can tell you that a substantial portion of it is. I represent probably around 1,500 ag producers in north central Nebraska and south central South Dakota. The impact that this has on the Nebraska producers and truly the property tax difference between Nebraska and South Dakota is substantial. It's a substantial deterrent to the profitability of Nebraska producers. And it also lowers our competitiveness with retaining young producers in our state when they comparatively can go to other states without the same property tax levies. In 2022, ag land valuations across the state rose 16% from the previous year. Grassland specifically saw an increase of 10 to 15% higher over 2021 valuations. You can imagine the frustration producers face when opening their property tax bill, finding an additional increase again on their valuations. Over the past 10 years, ag land valuations have increased 81.34%. Obviously, the property tax administrator is probably going to do a better job of explaining that to you than I will. But it's clear that the increase in ag land valuations has drastically exceeded the income potential of land, which has increased and in some cases decreased over that same period. A couple of issues that Nebraska Cattlemen realizes in this bill. We want to be clear that we're very much in support of this system of valuation of ag land. It's the only way to make us competitive with the surrounding states, each of which have an ag valuation process and an income valuation process that values ag land based on income. And our proposed language in the bill, it establishes a committee that will have the power to develop the income and expense estimates for ag land and to set the capitalization rate necessary to produce uniform proportionate valuations. One of our concerns is that setting the capitalization rate lower than our surrounding states will make us less competitive. Therefore, we would request a minimum cap rate that is comparable to what the surrounding states use. The capitalization rate of South Dakota is 6.6, Iowa is 7, and Kansas has a minimum of 11 with a maximum of 12. So when I tell you that the valuation of my property tax in South Dakota compared to Nebraska is about half, Kansas producers pay about 30%, I think, compared to Nebraska producers, just based on what their capitalization rate is. Capitalization rates provide what we believe is the most significant portion of relief in the surrounding states. We agree that a committee may be necessary to adjust this rate depending on economic conditions, but a minimum is necessary to achieve the actual relief that I think everybody expects this bill to provide. An additional concern that we have is specifically regarding rangelands and how it's valued, which is obviously very important to our members due to the nature of having cattle on grasslands and hay production. We believe there's two potential additional issues that need addressed in specific language of the bill. We believe the bill should be more specific in how the determination of net income of ag land occurs. And we would request Nebraska cattlemen and our lobbyists would be actively involved in processing of how to determine gross income and gross expenses. Placing the power to determine.
Sir, I'm sorry, your
Oh.
red light's on, but maybe somebody will ask you a question.
You're fine. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Senator Van Gillern.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I do have a question. Obviously, as you note, the cap rate's the devil in this detail.
Yeah.
Are adjacent states, do they have committees? Is it a set statutory rate? Is it a floating rate? Does it change year over year? How do
So-
they determine their rates?
So as I said, we looked at South Dakota and Iowa, which are both set rates. Kansas has a floating rate. I know that South Dakota has a committee, which is somewhat similar to what we have or what is proposed in the bill that provides for a committee to go over these. I think the committee needs to be larger. That would have been a larger part of mine. One ag producer can't represent all the ag types of land in the state. And so you would at least need to have somebody to represent grazing land in that portion.
Do you know of any instances where landowners have contested those rates through lawsuits or anything in other states? Any challenges with that?
The cap rates?
Yes, yeah,
I do not.
okay. All right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Gillern. Are there other questions from the committee? Oh, Senator Murphy.
I mentioned when I introduced that I represent a district along the southern border, and I just want to mention that I have cattle producers all through the district. I hear it all the time that actively try and find grazing land in Kansas rather than Nebraska, because if they're renting land, they don't have to pay as much down there because the property taxes are so much lower, about 1/3, I believe. And also if they're farming land down there, if they rent it, they can don't have to pay as much rent because the owner doesn't pay as much in property taxes. And also if they're trying to buy land, they can they'll buy it at a higher price down there because they don't have to pay as much property taxes. And same thing buying grazing land, they can pay more because they don't pay so much in property taxes. So you feel we're losing some potential income in the state because producers have to do that across the border, do those things across the border.
I think especially on state lines, we see a significant incentive to buy property outside of the state based upon the property tax payable. The one thing we don't often talk about, and it's hard to calculate, is the amount of producers that we lose based on this constant property tax implication from owning, especially grazing land in the state. The grazing land, you know, you hear rough numbers, $100 a cow. There's not that much profit in a cow. And so that all of the profit is being taken out by property taxes.
And of course, there is some incentive for, if they live close to the border, for if they have a son or daughter that wants to continue farming, to farm on the other side of the border.
I can tell you personally, there is no incentive whatsoever for me to be a resident of Nebraska or B, a landowner in Nebraska. I would be better off to move to Winter, South Dakota and buy property there and ranch and also be an attorney.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Are there questions? Senator Duggan.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. It's kind of a continuing theme that we've heard over the last couple of days about why people stay in Nebraska versus leave. You just said you have no reason to be here. Why do you stay in Nebraska?
My family has been here for 5 generations. My great grandfather was the first doctor in Mullen, Nebraska. And so our family ranch was based in north central Nebraska. We do own some property in South Dakota as well, but literally I'm at the point in my practice where I ask that question. The opportunity to move to another state is from a tax perspective compelling.
Right.
If I hadn't already established roots here, it would be a no-brainer.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Duggan. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time and thank you for your testimony. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Jessica Shelburne, JESSICASHELBURN, and I am the State Director of Americans for Prosperity. And I'm going to be brief. I won't take the 5 minutes, so it was okay. I'm here in support of LB 820 and the efforts of Senator Albrecht and Governor Pillen to change how we tax ag land in the state of Nebraska. As many of the previous testifiers have said, we have to find a way to be competitive. This is one way that we can help the ag sector. The ag sector is a key component of our economy here in Nebraska. We've weathered several storms financially on the back of the ag sector in our state. And we need to find a way to curb the excessive growth that they're seeing in property taxes. It's been going on for years, and we talk all the time in the legislative body about how do we keep folks in Nebraska. When the ag sector is our largest sector, and a large component of that is your farm and ranch industry, and you have individuals who would love to go home and farm on their family farm, and they're looking at it saying, we can't afford to, because maybe the family is starting to sell off part of that family farm because they cannot pay the property taxes. That is another way that we are losing people in the state of Nebraska. I'm originally from Senator Merman's district. I have a family that farms. They have been for generations. I have a younger brother who wants to farm, but isn't sure that they can because of the taxes that they are facing. And we're close enough to the border that it's easy to go to Kansas. So what the previous testifier said is conversations that are happening across the state of Nebraska on a consistent basis. We have to find a way. I don't disagree that we have to find a way to lower property taxes across the board for Nebraska residents. I think that that is a problem that we have. And it is a situation where everyone has to come to the table. We all have to be a part of the discussion. I think Governor Pillen has done an excellent job of trying to make sure that he's brought individuals to the table to figure out how we can address these issues. It can't be an all or nothing. There has to be compromise. And I think moving forward, we need to keep that in mind because this is going to determine the future of our state. So with that, I will answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Boster.
Thank you, Chair Linehan. Thank you for being here. Do you like the bill as is? I mean, we've been, a lot of the proponent testimony has recommended certain tweaks or changes, and I'm just curious.
I think that some of the tweaks and changes that have been mentioned are valid concerns and things to consider. I'm not a tax expert, and so I'm not going to pretend to be, but I think the overall concept is a good concept.
So, and let's say we did this, and let's say that you're in a county, the modeling comes out about what your tax increases would have been if we hadn't made the change and what it is now. And you learn that in your county, your increase would have gone up, 8%. But instead it went up 27% because we did this. And there's several examples of that. Don't you think that those people are going to come pounding on our doors and saying, this isn't what we meant by tax relief?
I do. I think that there is a real concern there. And I think that we've seen that in some counties in previous years. I don't want to speak as to which county, but I can recall news articles and stuff talking about counties that maybe hadn't changed their valuations. They hadn't done assessments for several years. And then all of a sudden came out and took that into account, and people were seeing that 20% increase. Now, I will say there are some counties, we live in one of them, the county that we're in right now, where we're seeing a 34%
Oh,
increase
it's
this year. And,
extraordinary.
and it's not just the first year.
It's not. And I understand that there's some, and it was mentioned that Brown County, right, that has the asterisk, and that's not even the one I'm referring to, right? But there's several in here that if we do this and we celebrate, as we should with any meaningful, significant policy reform that's there to make progress, and then we say, we're doing this to help provide this relief that is overdue and critical, which it is. And then people get their tax bill and it's significantly higher. I don't know what I would say to them.
And I think you're raising a very valid point, and it is something that we need to take into consideration. But I also think that there's an element of education that has to happen with the public.
I'm going to send them your way.
Thank you. I was a legislative staffer for 15 years. I've dealt with those calls, so go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Are there other questions from the committee? I know we all know this, but just for the record, just because your valuations go up, your property taxes do not have to go up.
Correct.
There's another lever that you can pull.
Unfortunately, they
Yes. I know it's
are in
not,
Lancaster.
but I do think in some counties that is the case.
Mhm.
So, okay, other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairman Lenahan, members of the Revenue Committee, good morning again. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. I would hate to guess how many of these efforts, legislative efforts to move toward a similar kind of way to value ag land that this bill proposes that I've been involved in the last 33 years, but it would be a lot. And so our organization is in strong support of the concept. We are in support of moving this direction. But based on what I've seen so far, and I'm not an expert, although I have a lot of experience, that I'm not sure that this bill is in proper form to go. I think there's more work that needs to be done. I think some of the folks before me have done a good job of raising some of the technical questions. I would say that some of the efforts that I've been involved in, where major efforts, major commitments of time were made by members of the ag community, and we all worked together and we got a bill ready to go. And between the last time that we met with our expert to go through it and explain how it was going to work, and when it got presented, things dramatically changed in their analysis, and we walked in with the bill that didn't do what we thought it was going to do, and it got tanked. And that was Senator Cordson. And so it is important to get these things right. And I would be willing to be involved or helpful if I could be, but we need to move this direction. So how far out of whack are we? I'm in the middle of working with my brothers to help transfer our family land to the next generation. So based on what that land is worth at auction and what will cash flow, that are that as I work with the cash flow of my nephew, he can afford to pay about 1/3 of what the actual market value of that land will bring. That's the most that a good young farmer who has a running start already could possibly afford to pay and ever hope to pay for it. And so the system we have now is and it's hard to understand. It's hard to explain. Goodness knows how many times I've tried to explain it to press interviews, And so why do people pay this much money? Because if a farmer has money and he's in a financial position to buy it, and it's been 30 or 40 years since the last time that land's come up for sale, and he has money in the bank, he uses all of the money that he makes in the rest of the operation in order to be able to subsidize what he pays and can afford to pay based on however much cash he has and how much earning capacity he has in the rest of his operation to buy that one additional piece of land. It is not a standalone cash flow based sale. So if they had to actually pay for it based on a standalone sale, the values that they're paying would go down substantially, because you can't pay $11,800 an acre for land in my section and think that will ever in a million years cash flow at that rate, because it won't. And so now the taxes I pay on my property is equal to what I used to pay for cash rent. So is that out of whack? Yes, it's dramatically out of whack. So with that, I'd be, and my testimony, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Henson. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
Other proponents? There any other proponents?
Morning, Senators. Excuse me. My name is Lynbartels. I really didn't have any idea to testify, but as I've been sitting back there listening to all the discussion, I just thought I'd like to add a few comments here. Senator Merman is my senator, or was my senator, I should say. I farm down there. I have farmed there for years. I am in the process of retiring, turning the ground over to a nephew. And so I'm from Franklin County. And I agree with this bill. It should be based on an income, because there's been a lot of years that we farmed and we had some bad years. And they say, well, you got irrigation, but those years that don't rain, it still costs me money to irrigate. So you're still spending extra money that you wouldn't on a year that you had rain. So the taxes are still there. They stay the same if you got a good year, bad year, or an excellent year. The last few years, we've had some really good years, commodity price wise, but it's cost us money to pump in our part of the state. Senator Merman said that Kansas people, the taxes are about a third less, or on that. That's an accurate statement. I have a brother-in-law that has pasture in Kansas, and he said it's at least that much or more or less than what Nebraska's pasture land is. We kind of joked the last few years that if we could move the Kansas border up about 20 miles, we could pump all the water we wanted in the Republican Valley NRD, and our taxes would be a whole lot less. But seems like Nebraska won't let Franklin County succeed from the state, so we're just doing the best we can. So anyway, just a couple other, I'm glad that we have a governor that's in ag production and sees the need for this. And as I said here, things have been brought up that I never thought of. I don't envy you guys your job. As someone said, this bill needs tweaked, and I think that's up to you guys to figure that out. But I still support the concept of this bill. And with that, I guess, one other comment I was going to make. The one lady said, like, in the rural areas, the housing market hasn't went quite as crazy as in the Lincoln, Omaha, and bigger areas. But I would disagree a little bit with that, because in our hometown of Franklin, I'd say in the last year, houses have probably doubled in price, if not a little more, as Senator Merman referred to in that area also. So, and I know that there's the idea of a consumption tax being kicked around. So maybe that's something the Senate or legislature or people is going to have to deal with down the road too, but as an alternative. I don't understand all of it, but the theory of it sounds pretty good too. So good luck on this and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Bartles, right, Mr. Bartles?
Bartels, yes.
Bartel, I'm sorry, Bartel. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. for
Thank
being
you.
here. Other proponents? Are there opponents?
It is much lower.
I don't know
morning.
who's in charge of that, actually.
Chairwoman Linehan, distinguished members of the Revenue Committee, my name is John Cannon, Joncannon. I'm the Executive Director of NACO, here to testify in conditional opposition to LB 820. We certainly appreciate the governor's interest, and we thank Senator Albrecht for bringing this up. Ag land valuation has been the Gordian knot in our property tax policy for many, many years. I can tell you that the majority of NACO's counties are rural in nature, and a majority of my elected officials have some sort of tie to the agricultural sector. And so this is something that affects us on a professional, on a countywide, and also on a personal level. One of the things I'd like to visit about are some of the structure that we have. We've been talking for the last several weeks about how property tax works, and you guys have been awfully patient with me, and I appreciate that. If I do run out of time, I would certainly love a question. But we have standards on mass appraisal that govern what everyone that's involved in the assessment of property have to deal with. The International Association of Assessing Officers, they publish standards on appraisal practices. Those are certainly worthwhile references for any of you. But one of the things that they say is the mass appraisal models apply to all three approaches to value: the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, and the income approach. And frankly, when you're looking at all these different approaches that we have to value, those approaches should generally correlate. And so as a practical matter, an income approach doesn't bother me at all. Because frankly, these things are all supposed to correlate together. They should yield something that's roughly similar as a result. IAAO standard on mass appraisal says the income approach is considered the most useful approach for the valuation of agricultural land. And they say if adequate sales data are available and agricultural property is to be appraised at its market value, and I want to stress that, sales comparison approach is preferred. So what are they exactly getting at here? Well, I'll go through our comments, and the devil's in the details because the devil's always in the details, Senator Von Gillern. So years ago, we tried this approach. We've been here before. I mean, this is like a back to the future kind of day for us. We had an ag land valuation manual that was published by the tax commissioner, and it was distributed to all 93 county assessors. And based on that ag land valuation manual, they had incomes and they had cap rates that they were supposed to use for every single subclass of agricultural land across the state. And what happened was Banner County said our values compared to our surrounding neighbors of Cheyenne and Kimball County are way too high in comparison. Our land is rougher, it's a little harder to work with. And in fact, they petitioned the State Board of Equalization because we didn't have a Turk back then. And they said, we need to have this fixed. And the State Board said, we gave you what you're supposed to. And the Alvey manual is what it is. There's nothing we can do for you. It goes all the way up to the Nebraska Supreme Court, and the Nebraska Supreme Court said, yeah, Banner County is correct. Tiny little Banner County takes on the State Board of Equalization. So back then that was, I believe, it was the governor, the attorney general, the tax commissioner, a couple other of constitutional offices. Tiny little Banner County took them on and won. But here's what the Supreme Court said in Banner County is that we had previously talked about the Kearney Convention Center, where the Kearney Convention Center had sued Buffalo County, so we want to be equalized with the value of ag land at 40%. The Supreme Court said, yes, you get to be equalized with ag land. We fixed the Constitution to say that ag land can be valued separately. And Banner County said, okay, and based on that, we came up with our ag land valuation manual. Banner County said, however, we still have a uniformity concept. And we talked about uniformity last week, I believe. We have this uniformity concept that we have to apply throughout the valuation of property, particularly in ag land. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, you're right. And frankly, that uniformity is something that has to apply to all three classes. We didn't strike it for just ag. And so we amended the Constitution again. And we amended the Constitution again to say you have to have uniformity within the class of ag land. It doesn't have to be uniform with the non-ag uses. But here's the thing I want to point out. Banner County, they weren't arguing about equalization with non-ag uses. They were arguing about equalization with Cheyenne and Kimball counties, with the agricultural class of land in Cheyenne and Kimball counties. So I'm here to tell you we've been here before, and the Supreme Court has said that we can't do it. And and for what it's worth, if anyone's curious, that case is Banner County versus State Board, 226 Nebraska, 236. So what are the effects on the counties? I've got a handout for each of you as to what could happen if you've got a 5, a 10, a 15, or a 20% reduction in ag land values by county across the state. Super simple math. All I did was I said, here's how much ag, I'm out of time. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Just go to the chart quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Explain the chart.
So we've got your total value on a countywide basis. That's what counties are levying against. That's their total tax base. We took their original county tax rate. That's the second column. And then what we did was we said, if you had ag real that had a 5% reduction, what does that total look like? And that's that third column. What does the county's tax rate become? And you start to see, if you see anything that's in yellow, that means that they're over 45 cents, but still below the 50-cent constitutional limit that counties have. Okay. We looked at 2022 values and we said, what happens if ag land values go down by 10%? And you start to see a few more of those yellow, those levy rates have to go up. And you look at what's 15%, what's 20%, and all of a sudden you start to see some red in there. And that red is those counties, that would be those counties that all of a sudden, because of the mix of agricultural property and residential property and commercial property, they would have to go over the 50-cent limit. And oh, by the way, they can't go over the 50-cent limit. That's constitutional.
Okay. Got it. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Breezy.
Chair Linehan, and thank you for your testimony. Just to be clear, according to the property tax administrator's numbers here, the first year of this, ag land might go down 0.8%, roughly.
It could, but it just depends. And frankly, that's one of the key issues here is that we're going to be sending this. We're going to have all this information reviewed by a committee of 5. Okay, 2 of whom are going to be private people. We're going to have a private appraiser, and you're going to have someone from the ag industry. We're not paying them. I certainly hope we do, because they're going to be required to do an incredible amount of work, and they're going to produce the cap rate, and they're going to produce the income streams for every class of property across the state, and you're going to own those values. That's not going to be, the county assessor is just an inventorier. That's about it.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So when was the Banner versus State of Nebraska?
1987.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm looking at your chart and I'm seeing at the 20% minus 1, 2, 3, 4 counties that would go over 50 cents. One of them by 0.7%, so they might be able to find that. One of them by 2.5 cents. One of them by 0.17% or cents, excuse me, 0.05. So we had 4 out of 93 counties that would have to adjust their levy down.
That's at 20%. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, at 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So at 15%, you only have 2? Only 2.
Sure. So one of the things that is,
So I'm right on that, right?
yes, ma'am.
So it's out of, what is 4 out of 93? Percentage is not even 4%.
3.8%-ish.
Yeah, okay.
If someone checks my math, I'm so sorry.
Nope, that's good. Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Other opponents?
Morning, Chairwoman Linehan, and then members of the Revenue Committee. I'm Rebecca Firestone, REVECCA, FIRESTONE, Executive Director of Open Sky Policy Institute. We are here today in opposition to LB 820, but I want to start off by just saying how much we appreciate the governor's ambition and vision and the work of Senator Albrecht in bringing this concept forward and having this conversation because it's an important issue for the state of Nebraska. At Open Sky, we truly understand the challenge that increased valuations have for agricultural landowners and how that's translated into higher property taxes. However, that we're concerned that LB 820 won't necessarily be an effective solution to this challenge. Changing the way ag land is valued in Nebraska is a major shift in tax policy that deserves careful consideration and study before fully implementing, so we understand what the full implications are for all types of taxpayers in the state. LB 820 risks shifting the responsibility of paying for schools and local governments onto residential and commercial landowners in areas with a mix of property with a mix of property types. So the greatest benefit of this bill is likely to go to ag owners in those areas where there is a mix of property types because there will be a sufficient number of other types of properties on which to shift taxes. This is likely to be the case for communities in North Platte and Kearney, for which a tax cut for ag might require levy increases to make up for a loss in revenue, or potentially cuts to services. This is less likely certainly to be the case for places like Lincoln and Omaha. In those areas with a significant amount of ag land where there are relatively fewer residential and commercial landowners to shift tax burden onto, levies might need to be increased to make up for that lost revenue. So to consider some of these impacts and start to try to wrap our heads around what it might look like, we modeled the effect of the 3.5% cap on aggregate ag land growth for school districts in Lincoln County, since that's a county that would have a mix of different property types. And when we found that when ag land is capped at that 3.5% growth, the rural school districts, so the school districts with the most amount of ag land, were more affected by this shift than school districts that have more residential and commercial property. So we saw relatively little effect in the North Platte School District, saw much more of an effect in terms of the shift in the tax burden for the McPherson County schools and the Stapleton Public Schools, for example, because those are areas that have more ag land. We haven't modeled the full effect of this particular change. We just looked at the effect of the 3.5% cap because there are a lot of data inputs that would be needed to understand the full implications of the proposal, and we didn't want to make too many assumptions. Finally, we're concerned that the assessment cap could compound and eventually suppress the taxable value of agricultural land, leading to a real divergence from market value. This raises questions about how the bill would operate over time. Specifically, the compounding of the cap could mean assessed value could drop below 69% of market value, even the bill has a provision to keep it within that, above that rate. While the bill allows the property tax administrator to make adjustments to both the desired assessed values relative to market values, the compounding of the assessment cap could make it possible to maintain both this desired ratio and the 3.5% cap. So the question is, does the bill give discretion to the tax commissioner to adjust or choose which has priority? These considerations are why the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy has said that assessment limits are among the least effective, least equitable, and least efficient strategies available for providing property tax relief. To conclude, we oppose LB 820 because it could have a disparate impact on taxpayers, could result in shortfalls for schools, roads, and other critical services, and potentially disrupt the relationship between the taxable value of ag land and market conditions. We believe any proposal to change land valuations in Nebraska deserves considerable study and a real transparent and inclusive policy development process, basically so all of the stakeholders involved have a chance to kick the tires, understand the proposal, see what it does before shifting into implementation. We would encourage the Revenue Committee to work with a range of stakeholders to undertake this type of process, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Duggan.
Thank you, Chair Minahan, and thank you for your testimony. Just to make sure I understand, do you have a blanket objection to a shift away from the market approach, or is it just the shift into the income-based approach that's contemplated by the formula in 820? Is it an overarching objection to that way of evaluating land, or is it just this one here?
Thank you for that question, Senator. No, Open Sky doesn't have a blanket objection to use value assessment, but I think as the conversation here has described, the devil's really in the details, and we need to understand sort of the implications of the proposal and, you know, what is the shift in tax burden going to look like and who's going to be affected by it, and in particular, how are local political subdivisions in the state going to manage those that potential shift?
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duggan. Are there any other questions from the committee? Do you have ag producers on your board of directors?
Yeah, we do. Mhm.
Okay, I just presumed it and I didn't. Where's your ag producer from?
I'm running through. We have folks across the state, and you know, I'm sorry here, Senator Linehan. I'm going to say we actually don't. We have broad representation across the state. We don't have ag producers at this time. Excuse me for that. But I will say that this is this position of Open Sky Policy Institute of not being opposed to use value assessment, I think, is based on evidence and data. We just want to make sure that we're understanding the implications of the shift.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any other opponents? I know, it's low.
I'm sorry?
The chair is
Oh,
low.
yes.
We'll try to fix that over the noon.
Good morning, Chairwoman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Shane Ryan, ShaneRhian, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Omaha Public Schools. The Omaha Public Schools is the largest school district in the state, serving more than 52,000 students. I am here today in opposition to LB 820. While we appreciate Senator Albrecht's efforts to reduce the burden of property taxes on all Nebraskans, this bill would provide very limited potential property tax relief to our school district. LB 820 is intended to change the valuation method for agricultural land, shifting from a market-based approach to an income-based approach. The intent of this legislation is to provide property tax relief for farmers and ranchers. This legislation would not provide any appreciable property tax relief to our district and would disproportionately provide property tax relief to rural school districts. Depending on the amount of property tax relief provided, it could significantly increase the number of school districts that would receive equalization aid. This increase in equalization aid, in conjunction with foundation aid and increased special education funding, could become unsustainable in an economic downturn, likely impacting equalization aid before foundation aid or special education reimbursements. This could be compounded by significant reductions in state revenues from the proposed income tax legislation that is also part of the governor's tax relief package. Political subdivisions in the state of Nebraska rely heavily on property taxes. For better or worse, property tax is the most stable and predictable tax source. The Omaha Public School District has consistently opposed legislation which further shifts school funding to the state. The reason for this is very simple. TIOSA already consumes a significant portion of the state budget. Because of that, the legislature has historically manipulated TIOSA whenever it needed help to balance its budget, which creates further uncertainty and risk for schools. By way of example, prior to the adoption in 2016 of LB 1067, which repealed the common levy, the Omaha Public Schools budget was funded 45% by state aid and 55% by property taxes. Those numbers were reversed after its passage. Passage of LB 820 would have significant long-term implications for the Omaha Public Schools and our fellow school districts across the state because of the volatility of state aid. We appreciate the committee's time and efforts and would respectfully urge you oppose LB 820. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Merman, thank you.
How much ag land do you have in Omaha Public Schools?
We have $33 million of value of ag land valuation out of almost $29 billion, 0.11%.
Okay, very low amount. So you're concerned that you could lose, or the state could lose income from property taxes. Well, the state wouldn't lose the income, but property taxes to support schools. So the state would pick up more of that, but you do have a high amount of poverty in the district. Is that correct?
So I'm going to address the first part of your question. We have two concerns. Number one is a significant reduction in ag land valuation could shift more rural districts into the need for equalization aid, which would be an additional burden on the state, on top of the proposed loss of income tax revenue that the state is contemplating. Secondly, yes, we do have a extremely significant poverty population at Omaha Public School Districts. Our free and reduced lunch rate has been about 76% over the last few years. And this year we became the first district in the state to participate fully in the community eligibility program, providing free lunches for all students in all of our schools.
You would prefer taxing that property in your district at a higher rate so that you would not lose state aid. You're concerned about losing state funding, so you would prefer taxing the property in the district higher.
I am concerned about other districts moving into equalization, requiring additional state resources, and the state no longer having the funding to continue its current support at Omaha Public School District.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. I have a couple.
Yes.
So do you know the last time the legislature, as I think you said, moves the levers on the TIOSA formula, last time the legislature did that?
It was a couple of years ago, and it was a favorable adjustment, lowering the local effort rate in TIOSA. But there have been times.
Yes, I know. I'm
Okay.
well aware there's been times,
Perfect.
but when was the last time when we adjusted it to lower the equalization rate?
I apologize, I don't remember the exact year.
Okay. So I understand that Omaha has specific challenges. So in your TIOSA formula, there's part of the formula that addresses poverty, right?
There is, yes.
So that adds more funding to your district
It
than
does.
otherwise it would. It also is there's funding for English language learners, right?
That is correct.
And you have a large percentage of English language learners, don't you?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's funding in the formula for that too.
Yes, ma'am.
So as you said a couple times this week, you get 55% of your funding from the state.
Yes, ma'am.
So what about the kids who are in unequalized school, who are free and reduced lunch, or they're English language learners? Are we not supposed to help them? I don't understand. I don't really understand how Omaha, which gets 55% of its funding, can be against other kids across the state, other schools who also have low-income kids, English language learners, and nobody's threatening your funding. The governor set aside $1 billion to make sure we're not going to have a funding problem, plus $250 million for the next 4 or 5 years, amounting to over $2 billion, on top of the fact that we have $1.6 billion plus the reserve to over another $2 billion. It's hard to believe that you're really worried. It's $4 billion sitting in reserves over the next 5 years.
Thank you for the question, Chairwoman. We are very concerned about all children throughout the state. TIOSA is a formula designed to equalize property taxes among 244 disparate school districts that have very different resource levels. In the case of Omaha Public Schools, we start out building a budget with approximately half the money that we need to educate our students from property taxes and local resources. And so we require and receive very generous state aid to help fund that effort. The majority of school districts across the state, through local control and spending caps and lids, levy lower than the $1 local effort rate in the TIOSA formula to fund their school districts. They have sufficient resources to provide their services.
I know how the formula works. I also know that if you're low income and English language learner in a little rural school district, the state is not providing any help. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that sentiment in the TIOSA formula, yes.
Seems a little bit unfair. When you think, just a little bit?
They certainly have resources available through their local resources to help increase their school funding.
So your Omaha Public Schools position is that we don't have any empathy for any other taxpayers in the state. And what we're most important about, which is absolutely right, is our kids, and we're gonna take care of our kids.
That is not what I said, Chairwoman Linehan.
Okay, I'm sorry. Where am I wrong?
We are here with grave concern over a potential shift of obligations and resources by the state that would impact state funding for equalized school districts throughout the state, including Omaha Public Schools.
How much would the governor have to put in the education future fund for Omaha to not be concerned?
I can't answer that question because I don't know how much ag land valuation reduction is actually going to occur.
Okay, well, maybe you can go back to your board and they can come up with an answer. And we can work on it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other opponents?
Good morning, Senator Lenahan and members of the Revenue Committee. This is pretty short, this chair.
Questions might not be, Jack.
My name is Jack Moles, that's JACKMOLES, representing NERCSA, the Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association, of which I am the executive director. At this time, we would like to testify in opposition to LB 820. We agree with Senator Albrecht and many of you that there's an over-reliance on property taxes, especially as it relates to ag land. We balance that, though, with the idea that we do need to properly fund our schools. Our opposition today is based on the idea that we think this is a concept that does need studied. We don't disagree with that. What we do think is that it should be studied in relation to other bills that you are facing this year. There are proposed bills that would change the way in which schools are funded this year. Using today's conditions, they would all be helpful to rural districts. We support those bills. Changing the way valuations are determined outside of the formula as we are adopting changes to the school funding is what causes us concern. We simply don't know how they would work together. So we would, at this time, we'd urge you to hold off on 820. We do encourage you to consider it later on after, and I say later on in a future year or so, after you've done the other school funding bills. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? You do understand the governor said this is a package.
This was not part of the pack. He did talk
It's
about this
all-
in the committee.
This is all
But-
part of the package.
Okay.
Big picture, part of the package is schools get more state funding. They have to give up some property taxes.
Mhm.
Do you see any way that the schools will give up property taxes for more state funding?
Yeah, we would.
Have some ideas?
Hmm?
Some ideas? We've tried a lot of them last 4
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, we like the governor's ideas on providing more funding to the schools. We love the trust fund, I guess I would say. There are some other bills out there that we like also that would help schools. LB 320 that you're going to hear in a week or two. We would support that also.
But none of those have the schools giving up any property taxing authority that you would support.
I wouldn't say that, Senator. If there's more state funding provided to rural schools, they're not going to have as much of a need to
I know,
levy
I know.
property taxes.
But is there a bill that actually balances more state funding with lowering your ability to tax that NERCSA would support?
Senator, I think what I'm saying is that our rural schools do a pretty good job of when they have other resources of trying to lower their property taxes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Senator Murray.
Yes, I think you mentioned that, and it's been mentioned before, that this type of change has been proposed in the past on how ag land is valued. Is there a way, do you have any suggestions on a way we can do it differently that you might support?
Not necessarily, but I do have an idea for you to consider down the road. And I think Open Sky kind of referenced what my thought and what I would like to look at and maybe work with somebody on a bill, maybe in another year or so, is to put together some kind of a study group that would include agriculture, business, schools, counties and cities, that would study these bills together and be able to give you, the senators, a better report on how they would affect current conditions and how it would affect things moving forward. So you have a better picture, so we have a better picture, but you wouldn't have different groups coming in trying to give you different views. You would have one view.
Second.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, I'm sorry. I think that's all.
Thank you.
Are there other opponents? Oh, Lord.
Good morning, Senator Linehan,
Good morning.
members of the committee. My name is Terry Keebler, TerryKeebler. I'm the Johnson County Assessor and also a board member for NACO, the Nebraska Association of County Officials, testifying in opposition to LB 820. Not real solid opposition, but I have some concerns with the implementation and what this bill does at this point. I've farmed for the last 29 years and been working on the farm for most of my 61 years. Understand the appeal of using income approach. I would just ask that the process be looked at a little closer before making such a major change in the method evaluation. I can remember being at the Farm Bureau meeting many years ago when one of these proposals was brought forth, and I didn't realize that we had a study on how this would impact, but similar experience at that time, a lot of excitement over what this was going to do to values, and the map was distributed around the room, and there was a big collective noise, and everyone started saying, we cannot do this. This raises my values, and not what was expected. So just some of the past history. So I was wondering if a similar study had been done on this one, this proposal, so that there are not unpleasant surprises. I think Senator Bostar talked about how that would go over. So I asked that this change not be rushed. There's a lot of information to sort through to get values to 93 counties for at least 4 subclasses of land. Our experience with the implementation with the LCG change back in 2019 was that an extra year to ask questions and study those numbers would have smoothed the implementation. The assessors did get that done. There were a lot of questions about how it was done. And part of that was just the fact we didn't have time to really dig into the numbers before we put them in. And we had to get it implemented by our deadline. And we had a little lack of time. So just a few questions on the details in here. We have splitting grass by haying and grazing. We don't currently inventory that separately. And there are places where that changes from year to year. So having that valued separately is a question. I think as John talked about earlier, just different approaches to value if we're using good mass appraisal methods should not come up with much different values. Any fee appraisal I've had done on our ground, those values are very similar between income and market. So, and one of the other questions I have on this is it talks about the committee meeting in November. There's no deadline of when this committee is going to get that information to the assessors. I would just ask that there be enough time that we can implement this, unless this is just plug and play and we really don't have any input of how that goes in. The other one that I had a little question on was the LCGs. In the bill, it talks about getting the information from USDA based on land capability group. I don't think that information is available from USDA based on land capability. I know when I talked to my FSA office yesterday, they have a county number average, but nothing to do with soil types or capability groups. And so I just want to make sure that there's some method out there for that. Thanks for your time and service, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Keebler? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Are there other opponents? Is there anyone wanting to testify in the neutral position? Okay, we have letters. LB 20, we have one proponent, no opponents, and one neutral. Hello, Senator Albrecht.
I really do wish I had a little pillow to sit up here. Okay,
Can we get that fixed somewhere?
no, we're good. We're good. We're good.
No, but before this afternoon,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
the chair.
Because you will not like that. Okay, thank you. Once again, I appreciate all the proponents and opponents. Not so sure that some of my proponents were actually opponents, but I want to just say that there has been a lot of work that's gone into this. Yes, it came to us, during our 10 days of trying to figure out what we're going to do. And, but what we've probably witnessed here in the last few days is it does appear that the governor was doing his homework, and he brought this to us for a reason. And like I say, I'm very grateful that he listened on the campaign trail to the farm and ranch families. But again, we make a living off of our land, and it's really not for sale. If it is, we're out of business, and or we can't transfer it over to the kids. And so a couple of things that was mentioned, and I get that people want to look at the numbers. I mean, if it were I, and they didn't ask my opinion, they just asked me to carry the bill. But I would perhaps go back 8 years and pretend like this was the year that we were going to enact this, and to take a look at the numbers. And I'm quite certain there's somebody out there that probably already has, or people that are working on that with some of the different groups that came up. But the first year, I understand that those charts reflect the initial year where there'll be some disproportionate changes. But the approach, what it is doing is what it's doing is making it sustainable over the length of the time that this is going to be enacted. So sustainability is what we as farm and ranch families are looking for. And I'm sure that the state of Nebraska is, as well as all of our schools that are usually funded from the property taxes that we pay. But I understand also that the Ag Land Valuation Board in the past did not value or tie it to market, but ours is different than what it was in years past. So I do believe we have a little bit of work to do so that we all understand exactly where we need to go. And I will be happy to work with anyone on the committee to get that work done, and get the answers to the public before we should put it on the floor with the package. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Are there any questions for Senator Albright? Seeing none, that will close the hearing on LB 820, and we'll see you all back here at 1:30, right?
Yes.
Okay.